The morning sun over the Persian Gulf fractured into a mosaic of metallic glints as a coordinated fleet of U.S. Treasury-authorized boarding vessels and Navy littoral combat ships executed a simultaneous approach toward the Kharg Island terminal, Iran's primary gateway for petroleum exports. Far below the flight paths of patrolling F-35s, the humid air of the Strait of Hormuz thrummed with the low-frequency vibration of heavy diesel engines, while the rhythmic flashes of Iranian coastal radar arrays began to strobe in frantic intervals as the physical and digital blockade locked into place. On the ground at the terminal, the environmental reality was one of sudden, clinical paralysis. The sharp scent of industrial lubricants and salt air hung over the piers as the massive pumping stations fell silent, their supervisory control systems neutralized by a high-altitude digital freeze that halted the flow of millions of barrels of crude oil. This was not a localized skirmish or a routine freedom of navigation exercise. It was the most comprehensive financial and physical decapitation of the Iranian energy sector in the history of the modern Middle East. According to Iranian state media and official statements released by the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tehran, the United States government initiated a series of illegal and piratical seizures against sovereign wealth funds and maritime infrastructure that were engaged in routine commercial operations. Iranian officials claimed that the American operation targeted $1.2 trillion in liquid assets held in international intermediary accounts, and that their primary oil port at Kharg Island was subjected to an unprovoked cyberkinetic blockade. Military spokesman in Tehran stated that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has already placed its ballistic missile units on high alert, claiming that any attempt to permanently divert these funds would be met with a crushing response in the maritime corridors of the Gulf. Symbolically, the Iranian leadership has framed these events as an act of total economic war, asserting that the seizure of these assets is a direct violation of international law and that the IRGC maintains the sovereign right to secure the region's energy flow against what they term Western financial terrorism. Iranian officials said that the freeze on Kharg Island is a desperate attempt to compensate for the failure of traditional diplomacy, and that the international community must intervene to prevent a total collapse of maritime order. But the story quickly became far more complicated. Before we break down the specific legal mechanisms of the Treasury Department's asset seizure and the strategic layout of the Kharg Island blockade, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the latest dramatic developments shaping global geopolitics. We are constantly monitoring the shifting tides of international power to ensure we can track these high-stakes escalations as they happen, and your support allows us to continue delivering these deep-dive analytical reports. According to U.S. Treasury officials and senior defense spokesmen in Washington, the operation was a precisely calibrated enforcement of existing international sanctions aimed at neutralizing the financial networks that fund regional proxy instability. U.S. authorities stated that while the Kharg Island terminal has been restricted, the majority of the $1.2 trillion in frozen assets were identified as illicitly laundered funds moving through a complex web of shadow banking entities designed to bypass the SWIFT messaging system. To understand the scale of this counter-narrative, one must look at the technical mechanisms of modern economic warfare. The U.S. utilizes the Office of Foreign Assets Control to create a multi-layered financial umbrella, using digital ledger tracking to identify the movement of petrodollars while simultaneously deploying naval patrols to enforce a red line around Iranian energy exports. U.S. media reported that the shutdown of Kharg Island was achieved through a combination of maritime interdiction and a localized disruption of the port's data acquisition systems, which managed the flow of oil from the storage tanks to the waiting tankers. Analysts noted that the seizure of these assets serves as a preventative measure to ensure that Iranian leadership cannot fund further escalations in the Levant or the Red Sea. Between these narratives lies a complex reality that analysts are still working to understand. Why do Kharg Island and these specific $1.2 trillion in assets carry such immense strategic weight? The answer lies in the geography of the second sanctions era and the vital role of the Iranian energy farm system in projecting power across the world's most critical maritime choke points. By targeting Kharg Island in the northern Gulf and the subterranean financial complexes and international banking hubs, the U.S. has effectively struck the nervous system of Iran's regional deterrent, as this port handles over 90% of Iran's crude oil exports, which fund the IRGC's regional operations. Attacking these facilities sends a strategic signal that the U.S. is no longer willing to tolerate the gray zone, economic activity, where petroleum sales are used to fund proxy militias without direct state-on-state accountability. Furthermore, the inclusion of the $1.2 trillion figure is significant because it represents the entirety of Iran's accessible foreign reserves and long-term investment capital, a capability essential for both domestic stability and the procurement of advanced military hardware. The message was clear. The United States has the intelligence, the reach, and the financial dominance to dismantle the Iranian state's primary economic toolkit in a single operational window. The cascading consequences of this seizure began within minutes of the final digital freeze, triggering an escalation pyramid that is currently reshaping the global order. First, the immediate military reaction saw the deployment of additional U.S. Navy Aegis destroyers to the Strait of Hormuz to conduct real-time escort missions for commercial tankers, while the IRGC Navy reportedly scrambled fast attack craft in a desperate attempt to mine the waters surrounding Kharg Island. Second, regional governments reacted with a mixture of quiet support and public alarm. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates immediately moved their production facilities to high alert, with Kuwaiti authorities increasing naval patrols in their northern maritime zones. Third, the global market and economic reaction was instantaneous, as oil prices surged by nearly 14% in overnight trading, with Brent crude crossing the $115 mark amid fears of a prolonged closure of the world's primary oil terminal. That spike in energy costs has consequences far beyond the borders of the Persian Gulf. Fourth, diplomatic channels reached a fever pitch as NATO allies expressed a cautious recognition of the threat, yet simultaneously pressured Washington to avoid a full-scale maritime conflict that could destabilize the European heating sector. Finally, the domestic political reaction in the United States has seen a sharp divide, with the White House briefing congressional leaders on the necessity of economic decapitation, while critics question the long-term impact on global inflation and the dollar's status as a reserve currency. The Iranian government maintains that this asset seizure is a theft of national wealth that will lead to a total breakdown of regional security. The United States maintains that the mission successfully degraded the IRGC's ability to fund global terror and has established a new baseline for financial deterrence. As the silence remains over the Kharg Island terminals, the international community finds itself at a crossroads where the line between a limited economic strike and a full-scale regional war has become dangerously thin. The sudden removal of over $1 trillion from the Iranian ledger, combined with this latest maritime blockade, has created a power vacuum that could lead to either a total regime collapse or a desperate, scorched-earth retaliation by the IRGC's remaining naval forces. Will this asset seizure remain an isolated incident, or is it the beginning of something far larger? Stay tuned for further updates as this situation continues to develop. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss the latest dramatic geopolitical developments shaping the world.
To support independent journalism and ensure you receive our latest analysis, click subscribe.